Backyard Farmer is a co-production of NET Television and Nebraska Extension.
Tonight on Backyard Farmer, we'll be helping you extend your garden season with a hoop house and helping you with tips on pruning hydrangeas. That's all coming up next, right here on Backyard Farmer. Good evening and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd and I'll be your host for the next hour of good gardening. Joining me on the panel, we have our experts from Nebraska Extension. We have Tom Weisling answering our insect questions. We have first appearance of the year for Tom and Bill Kreuser. We have Bill Kreuser doing the turf stuff.
How you doing?
Lauren Giesler, first day in the chair as Rots and Spots.
It's always great to be here, Kim, and great to be here for another season.
And the good old regular Sarah Browning, whole second show of the year in the horticulture chair.
Good to be here, Kim.
You know, we'd love to hear from you as well. You can call in your questions by dialing 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Our email address, byf@unl.edu. Those questions get answered on a future show. If you do send us an email, please give us as much information about your question as you can, including where you live. We won't come knock at your door. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for weekly gardening announcements and information. And before we get to your questions, let's look at samples. And Tom, we've already been getting a lot of questions about this one.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to show are some insects that look like emerald ash borer. And in this box, I have several insects that have a green hue to them. So there's a lot of green insects out there, and they're all bright and shiny, and it's real easy to look at them and say, wow, that must be an emerald ash borer. It's nice and green and shiny. Emerald ash borer is actually right here, very tiny insect, and it's got a really deep green color. Now, within this box, like I said, there's several green, shiny insects. So if we come down over to this insect, I got my finger on, and this is a green June beetle, and this is actually something we don't see around this area. It used to be just found in the southern part of the state or even just in Kansas, but we're beginning to see that more and more. So there's just a wide diversity of things that are nice and green and shiny. Just make sure you get things identified when you find something.
And we do not have that one yet,
We will.
to our knowledge.
We will.
Right?
Optimistic.
It's a matter
Optimistic. Okay, Bill, that is not turf.
This is not turf. This is a backflow preventer from an in-ground irrigation system. And the reason I brought this today is because it's been pretty dry and warm in March, and so a lot of people turn their irrigation systems on. But now we're going to get pretty cold over the next couple of days here with lows well into the 20s. And so there's a risk that these systems are going to freeze up. And so what can happen here, you can see in this picture, is a backflow preventer that burst in the spring last year, and a geyser coming off the side of this house. And so if you're not there to turn it off right away, you could have quite a flood. So what you can do is turn that off right away. If you do have a burst, you can buy these from an irrigation store. You can install them yourself. They're pretty simple. They just screw right in. Save yourself some money having a technician come out to fix that for you. But when it's cold out like now, just turn those irrigation systems back off to make sure they survive the cold spell.
All right, thanks, Bill. Okay, Lauren, all excited about a rot in a spot.
Well, that's my job. I'm always got to be excited about something that doesn't look real pretty. But this is a great time of year to do some cleanup yet. You know, we're just coming into the season, and so I brought along some twigs from a red twig dogwood, actually out of my yard, that has Cytospora canker. And so if we can take a look at this, you can see just even on you can see that it's nice red color here, but on these tips, they're bleached out. And I don't know how close we can get if we'll see that. Here's an older twig, and actually on this one, maybe we can see this. See all those little black specks on there. So all those specks are individual fruiting structures of the Cytospora fungus. So just by some simple management of debris and clipping out these older tissues with fungal diseases, we go 3 to 4 inches below the affected area and prune those out. And just with sanitation, you can do a lot to manage that disease in your landscape. So just want to encourage you as you're cleaning up, look for any off-colored branches and prune those out about 3 to 4 inches below the affected area.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. And Sarah, a little bit of spring.
Last week's warm temperatures are causing some of our early season shrubs to start blooming. This is forsythia, one of our very earliest of the spring bloomers. We get a lot of questions in the spring about pruning flowering shrubs. And so with something like forsythia, you want to wait until it's done blooming and then go ahead and prune it after that time. If you prune it now, of course, you're going to be cutting off all these flower buds that are just waiting to pop out, even if yours haven't popped out like this one already. So early season blooming shrubs, wait till they're done blooming before you do the pruning. If you have shrubs that bloom later in the summer, then you can go ahead and prune those in the spring because they'll be forming flower buds as we move through the season. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb with the flowering shrubs regarding to pruning.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Okay, Tom, you get the very first picture question.
Yay.
This is a viewer that actually we've had quite a string of conversation about this. We're not sure where he is, but this is likely a crabapple.
Okay.
And it has all of these creepy white things on them that then have what appear to be little red spidery-like insects. What should he do about this to treat or to cut down the trees or run for his life, essentially?
Well, Kim, I really like it when you refer to insects as little creepy things. But really, I'd want to start off, the first step in any of this is to get a proper identification. And based on the information we have, we just can't make a proper identification on it based on, at least we know what the host is, but it would be nice to see a clear picture and actual sample. But we speculated about this in the entomology hall today. And we feel it may be mealybugs. And mealybugs can overwinter as early instar insects in bark. Mm-hmm. So it could be possible that they're out, and that's the mealybugs that are out getting ready for to start to develop again. Once the new growth comes out, then they'll move to the new growth. And then at that point, they'll mate and they'll start to lay eggs. So the little pussy things that he talked about, little white things with the little red insects coming out of them, those are probably in the summertime. Those are egg masses that are laid. And when they hatch, the little crawlers come out and then they go off and seek foliage.
So should he just gather up a few of those and tuck them off to his local extension office? Or?
Yeah, a sample would be really good. And then to get rid of them, really, they're not that harmful. But usually a garden hose with maybe a nice strong spray, not enough to take the bark off, but a nice strong spray would be adequate.
Okay, before he cuts down the tree.
Yes, don't cut down the tree.
Okay, thanks, Tom. All right, this is a Nebraska City viewer, Bill, and the picture is of this turf that is clumpy and different appearing. And they want to know, what is it and what should they do about it? They don't necessarily need a perfectly uniform turf, but these bright green, tall growing patches kind of have them concerned.
Sure. It's really hard to tell exactly what grass species that is from the picture. It could be a couple of different things like roughstalk bluegrass and some annual bluegrass, which doesn't look like that, or even just some more common old varieties of Kentucky bluegrass. And so there's some grasses green up at different rates than other grasses, and so things like tall fescue are a little bit slower. And if you have a mixture of grasses there in the spring, we'll notice that the grasses are greening up differently. And so just be a little bit patient. Notice that around those clumps is kind of thin, so increasing nitrogen fertilization to help to build those other grasses up. In the summertime, they'll start to all blend together a little bit, but it's hard to idea just from that picture, but it's probably just a different grass species growing up a little bit faster in the spring.
So would that be a case where if they are going to overseed, pay a little bit better attention to what's on the tag?
Yeah, if you look at a seed label, you'll see things on the bottom like weeds. And so you want to look at the bottom of the label, show you what cultivars are in that bag, but then also make sure that there's no noxious weeds or other type of weeds like rough bluegrass that can be really challenged to get rid of once you're established.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Lauren, we had some questions last week that are good from viewers who had problems last year and they want to sort of nip them in the bud. This picture is one of those from a viewer who said this is what happened to their apples, and they want to know what it is and what do they do to prevent it from happening this year.
Okay, well, and if you look at the leaves, you can see there's a few circular spots or lesions that look like they're cedar apple rust. And this tree probably had a fairly severe infection from that, would be my guess. And then the leaves start to yellow and the whole tree starts to look pretty poorly and can significantly defoliate. And this is a really good time to talk about that, because if you do have fruit trees and you're trying to avoid these types of diseases, if you have a susceptible cultivar, you want to make sure and get on a fruit tree spray program. So I would really encourage you to look at that. And a lot of those will start at, even bud break, or at the pink stage of bloom. So before we get that happening here in the next couple of weeks, make sure you're ready for that if you're trying to do that. And if you're looking at establishing any new fruit trees, just take a look at the common diseases that are out there, like this cedar apple rust, scab, and try to get some cultivars that aren't susceptible to it, and do yourself a favor so you don't have to do that management in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Sarah, there is a red bud on the market called Covey, which is a weeping form. This is a Lincoln viewer that had one. I think it's been in the ground about 8 years. And he describes it as bark break, which is essentially on the trunk of the tree. It's kind of all broken. His question is there any hope, or is this tree toast?
This is a pretty serious wound. So the chances for this tree surviving and being a really good long-term tree in the landscape are fairly low. Although if you look really closely, you can see around the edges of the wounded section, the tree is trying to put out callus tissue to seal over that damaged portion of the trunk. Now, whether the tree will ever be able to actually do that completely is kind of a question. But what's going to happen is that wood in the center of the trunk is going to start to rot, so you'll get some wood rot there in the center of the trunk. So I don't think there's a really hopeful outlook for this plant. That's a pretty serious wound on the base there, and there's really nothing you can do directly to help the tree heal.
And this is the perfect season to buy a new one.
Yes.
We've had some warmer weather lately, and while it's not exactly time to get everything planted in your garden, you can get a jump start this season by using a simple hoop house. For more information on building and using your own hoop house, here's Master Gardener Tim Duncan to tell us more.
Okay, so the Master Gardeners and I worked on this last fall, so probably right at the middle to the end of October. So we're probably a little bit late in terms of optimal. But it's pretty simple construction. You can see there's a raised bed. The raised bed is made out of 2x6s. The hoop house itself uses PVC pipe, half-inch PVC pipe, bent into the hoop, and then the individual hoops are strapped on to the inside of the 2x6s with conduit strap. There's one supporting purlin across the top that's connected to the ribs with, in this case, baling wire, but you could use a bolt or a nut. And then the plastic is 6 mil hardware plastic. It's I think just plastic drop cloth. It doesn't have a UV inhibitor, so in this case, it's probably going to disintegrate by the end of the next season. It's gonna probably break and get fragile. I have one at home where after 2 seasons, the plastic is broken apart. You can go to a hardware store, a garden store, or a garden catalog and probably find UV inhibited plastic that would work and last longer. So anyone can find these materials. The hardware store, like you said, the box store, home improvement store, you're gonna be able to find these easily right off the shelf. So I've had the most success in the fall, starting probably September, and lots of success with lettuce, lots of success with spinach and several other kinds of greens, and I've been able to eat fresh salad out of the hoop house until well into December. In the spring, you probably have the best luck with the cold weather crops like broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi, radishes, things like that like the cool weather a little bit better, and then you can get the greens restarted again as well. So why do you build a hoop house? I think exactly what I stated a little bit earlier. For me, the gardener, I want to be out in the garden as soon as possible, and I want to stay out there as long as possible. So this is an opportunity to do that. I think there's also the appeal of I can continue to eat fresh greens out of my garden well into the snow. Keep in mind that this is not the way to build a hoop house. This is a way, and for every suggestion I give, you can go to the internet and find someone else's suggestion.
We're excuse me, we're all anxious at the beginning of spring to get our projects started. Using one of these expensive hoop houses is a really great way to grow those colder season crops. And you can still enjoy your leafy greens and vegetables early in the spring or late in the fall. And Tim did a really nice job on that. That's in the Backyard Farmer Garden. So hopefully we'll see some good things to eat out of there. All right, Tom, you get a question that is actually beautiful. This is a butterfly ID question, and this viewer actually saw this butterfly, it looks like maybe a couple weeks from the email. They want to know what it is and does it overwinter here?
Kim, thank you. You described an insect without saying yucky
Creepy.
or icky. Yes, it is a beautiful comma butterfly. And the neat thing about comma butterflies is they overwinter here as adults, as the butterfly. And if you looked at the underside of its wings, it looks a lot like a dried leaf. So they can get down in leaf litter and hide themselves really well, or even a piece of bark. Now, they'll become active on warm days, and they'll come out and fly around. And they will mate, and female will lay eggs in the springtime, maybe into June. And she'll lay it on nettles, hops, maybe elm. And the little larvae hatch out and they start to feed on that plant material. And they look a lot like bird droppings, which is really awesome. So they're somewhat well disguised. They're magnificent butterflies. They are one of several species, or at least 5 or 6, that actually overwinter here. And you can see them commonly in the springtime.
Awesome, and they're beautiful. They really are pretty. All right, Bill, lots of this coming out of the ground, and viewers are wondering what it is and how to treat it.
Sure. So that is prostrate knotweed. It is an annual weed that starts to germinate really early in the spring. And so that's why we're starting to see it now, and it'll continue into the summer. It's generally found in areas with really poor soil, so around, next to a curb where it's highly compacted, it's wet. Those are areas that can be really, really problematic. The turf is usually pretty thin, and so from a cultural perspective, trying to maintain good soil aeration with aerating and a good stand of turf will really help to keep it under control. If you want to go the chemical route, something like a triclopure or a 3-way mix of 2,4-D will do a good job of knocking this guy out, but you need that 3-way mix. But ultimately, think about this as I'm managing my turf incorrectly, and how can I take care of this weed without using those products?
So it's usually along sidewalk edges, those kinds
Yeah,
of things.
anywhere that's really compacted, wet, and hot too. From that's why you see it pop up there first.
All right, thanks, Bill. Lauren, this is a Bayard viewer, and they have 10-year-old ponderosa pines. They began to color incorrectly in November of last year. He says they were watered well, and they also had good soil moisture out there. They've gotten some iron supplements, half a cup of ironite each spring and fall. And he's wondering, is this a disease? Is this desiccation? What might we be looking at here?
And there's a couple things there. When I see tips of trees or half the tree affected, I always wonder if there's some sort of a chewing or a canker that's going on in the tree. Keep in mind that dry conditions can favor some of our cankers. So if they were watered well, it's not real conducive for it. When you see the whole brown tree failing at 10 years, that's kind of odd to see that. So at the 10-year mark, we can see things, like pine wilt nematode, but that tree's too small for that. So honestly, I can't say for sure what it is. I think I would wait and see how they green out. If you got some desiccation, they look pretty open where they're at. But just look to see if there's any greenness down in the base of those brown needles. And then if you're not seeing that and they're not greening up at all, I guess I would recommend maybe a sample or something sent to the diagnostic clinic, because it's kind of hard to tell from that. But look for any chewing, any canker type issues on those trees that you see half the tree damaged or just a portion, and then kind of go from there.
And the iron?
I wouldn't do any treatment. I don't know the iron, if
Sarah?
there'd be any burning, Sarah?
Any notion on the iron?
Yeah,
something.
generally, lack of iron is not an issue with these types of pines, so you shouldn't have needed to supplement with iron. But iron toxicity would not really be an issue usually either. That would get tied up in the soil pretty quickly. So I'm not sure how that plays into this problem.
I don't really
Other
think
than
it would
being
relate
in
to it at
Bayard
all.
and delayed
Yeah.
drought or something.
It really would be nice to see a sample so we could take a close-up look and examine the roots and the trunk and everything.
Okay, all right, thanks guys. Sarah, you get a question from Clarinda, Iowa. This is a burning bush, euonymus, and they just saw this big old split at the base of it, wondering whether they should go ahead and cut it off, leave it alone. What can they expect for the prognosis on this particular shrub?
Yeah, that is really bad. Sad that that crack is right down at the base of that main stem. I don't think it's life-threatening. I think that this shrub could go ahead and live even with that split there. But the problem would be that the stability of the smaller half. You know, you might, if it's split all the way, the smaller half might break away and lay down on the ground. It's not going to be a real easy thing for you to work with as far as pruning. I guess you could take the smaller half out and just let the other half kind of reshape it so that it doesn't look so weird, because it's going to look like you lost half of the plant. But there's really no easy way to address this. You certainly wouldn't want to cut the plant down to the ground. That would be way too drastic. So that's a tough problem.
You know, they will rejuvenate if you cut them like
and I've seen euonymuses cut back really, really hard, and eventually they grow out of it, but it takes them a long time to do that. So honestly, if it were my plant, I would probably just leave it alone and just see what the future brings and how it does.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Well, the warmer weather has been great for us to get outdoors, but in terms of gardening, we have been in serious need of moisture in some parts of the state. This week's Green and Growing tip focuses on proper watering techniques to save your soil and give it a much-needed drink. The hot, windy weather has really caused us to need to put some water on our landscape. And there are right ways to do this and wrong ways to do this when you are not using an automatic system. We do low and we do slow. We don't do a big wide gush, especially when the soil itself is almost like sand. In some locations in the landscape, between the wind, the sun, and the temperatures, it has really just turned to dust. And if you blast away with the hose, all that's going to do is create divots and rivets and cause that soil to go elsewhere. So very low, very slow, apply the water, preferably ½ an inch in a week if you possibly can. If you've planted new trees and shrubs in the fall of the year, or even now, make sure you soak the root mass, not just at the canopy line. And that is particularly important if the ball of that tree is of a different composition from a soil standpoint, which it always is. So attach that hose. Don't forget to take the hose off just in case it freezes again. You don't want that dry soil to be disturbed with that huge gushing hose, so a light sprinkle will keep the soil where it needs to be and really get it properly hydrated before we get those showers usually. And I'm the worst at, kind of doing that with the hose. All right, you get just a question, Tom.
Okay.
This is a Murdoch viewer who would like to put out some houses for mason bees.
Oh.
And they're wondering, is it too early to do that? And they love our show.
Well,
So there you go.
glad you love our show. That's great. Mason bees would be awesome to put domiciles out. No, it's not too early. Right now I'm in the process of kind of doing some spring maintenance on the Backyard Farmer bee hotel that we have. So I'll be putting it out probably in about another 3 or 4 weeks. So if you get it out generally, I'd say by mid-April, you're fine.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Bill, what is the best way to repair turf damage from winter snowplow activity, gravel in the grass, torn up pieces of turf? We don't know where they're from, but I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much everywhere. I saw it walking around this morning, actually, and it's the best way to repair those areas is the same way you repair any kind of turf area. You first want to prep the soil. If you have a big strip of sod missing, bring in some new soil if required, level it off, put a starter fertilizer down, and then sod would be better now than seed because it's cool soils and a lot of weed competition we have in the spring in Nebraska makes it tough to seed. But if you need to seed little areas, that's fine. Just make sure you keep it watered. Generally, just general seeding best management practices are the way to go.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Bill. Lauren, this is a viewer who has oaks, spruce, those kinds of things. They've done some limbing up and some cleaning out, and now they're getting shrooms, toadstools of some kind, under all of those trees. What to do about that?
Just enjoy them. They're beautiful. Yeah. No, there's a lot of different mushrooms that we'll see it, or nuisance, we say nuisance fungi in the landscape. But, the best thing, if you can, avoid any large debris incorporation, or like mulch, or when you have a tree removal or something where you got that sawdust. That's what's going to build in the soil to give a food source for those mushrooms to develop and those fungi to grow to where they'll fruit like that. Now that said, if it's already happening, it's in the process of breaking down, and there's a pretty good chance maybe they won't continue if you just pick those just in case they are poisonous, to remove them so you don't have kids or pets or something trying to eat them. And that would be really the recommendation at this point. There's not anything you can do to treat them to make them not be there. It's just trying to avoid introduction of their food source. That's the best thing you can do. And try to use conifer-based mulches, even though this is if it's under a pine. Conifer-based mulches in general do not result in as much mushroom growth as hardwood mulches or softwood mulches.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Sarah, this is an Omaha viewer, and they had last year golden bantam sweet corn from seed, and they were using Three Sisters, which is a fun way to plant. Mm-hmm. Plants grew fine, the ears were a decent size, but the kernels were tough, starchy, and really not edible at all. They want sweet corn again this year. They wonder if they did something wrong with golden bantam last year.
Well, golden bantam is an older cultivar, and so you might want to look for one of the cultivars that's, the super sweets or the extra sweet type, and you might have better results. You also have to consider with corn, though, sweet corn, the pollen source on the ears of corn affects the flavor and the texture of the kernels of corn that you get. So if your golden bantam happened to be pollinated by field corn, then that would definitely affect the kernels. It would make them much more starchy and tougher. So you need to kind of protect your corn to make sure that it's getting pollinated by another type of sweet corn. So that's a little hard to do if you're surrounded by fields all around you. You may not really be able to grow sweet corn very successfully on your own if you can't control the pollen source. So that's just another consideration that you'll have to take into account.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, not much happening outside at the Backyard Farmer Garden this week. So for our minute before break, Terry James will open the door to the greenhouse to show you what we've got started and take a peek into our hoop house that we saw earlier.
There may not be a lot of planting outdoors in the Backyard Farmer Garden this week, but we sure are planting a lot indoors. The greenhouse is booming with plants all over on our benches. We started about a month ago with some of the perennials that take a little bit longer to start going, but just about a week ago we started some of those warm season annual veggies that we're all excited about. Some of the new tomatoes and some of the new peppers that the All America Selection has coming out. We also actually started moving some of this stuff out into our high tunnel. We got some radish seeds planted, a new All America Selection Roxanne that's coming out this year. We also got some of our kale and some of our kohlrabi in our high tunnel. That way we'll get a little bit of a head start on some of those cool greens, and we're just going to keep an eye on all of the rest of our plants as we move in and hope that the weather warms up to get those plants planted outdoors.
It's time for a short break. Coming up on our show, we'll have Gladys's Plant of the Week and the Lightning Round. Stay tuned for more Backyard Farmer right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. Later on in our program, I'll be showing you tips on pruning your hydrangea plants for amazing blooms later in the season. You can still phone in your questions by dialing 1-800-676-5446 While you're doing that, we'll start the lightning round. Sarah, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, with all that stuff growing in the backyard farmer greenhouses, still okay to start tomatoes inside?
It's getting a little late. Usually you need about 6 to 8 weeks to grow a good tomato transplant, but just keep that in mind.
All right. Can gladiolas be planted after a pre-emergent is put down? And this is a Gordon viewer.
No, you wouldn't want to put a pre-emergent down. If the pre-emergent was applied by mistake, then I would try to work the soil up to disturb the pre-emergent barrier, and maybe you'd have some luck.
All right. Would top hat be a good blueberry to grow in a container in Bridgeport, Nebraska?
Blueberries are not a great fruit of choice for Nebraska, but if you really want to grow it, then top hat does fine in containers.
When would this viewer prune a hardy garden sage?
Hardy garden sage, I would wait maybe till about the second week in April, and then you prune it back, whatever's winter killed, and get it going for the next summer.
Can mums be moved now if this viewer has to build a retaining wall?
What I would do is dig them up and put them in a container temporarily, and then when you get the wall done, then go ahead and replant them. The soil is cool now, and you're going to get minimal root development for the time being, so I think they would do better in containers.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. No passing. Okay. Are any of the early mushrooms
Didn't ask me if I was ready.
are any of the early mushrooms in lawns edible?
Well, first of all, I'm ready like olive loaf or whatever your favorite lunch meat is. The early mushrooms, typically, I would not recommend eating. Okay,
All right.
Unless you know what you're doing and you get them identified correctly by an expert.
Okay. So if a person had botrytis in their peonies last year, is there anything they can do to prevent it? Like right now, do?
Well, I would do some great sanitation right now. It's an excellent time to do that before everything starts to come out. Get that residue up and clean up around to reduce the inoculum.
Okay, there is a disease of the coral bells or the heuchera right now. Do we know what that is? Have we diagnosed that or seen it?
I'm not sure. Well, wait, there's a smut disease, I believe, that's on coral bells that they're seeing now. The interesting thing with that is that many times, I'm not sure about this one, many times those are systemic, so they're going to be difficult to manage. I would watch it if it's in your landscape and see what happens. If you're looking at any transplants, I wouldn't introduce them to the landscape.
All right, excellent. Even though you wasted half your time telling me that I forgot to tell you when to start.
I don't understand. You always ask me if I'm ready. I can't. There's certain things we have to do, Kim.
Okay, Bill, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Will pre-emergent take care of summer annuals in the lawn?
Pre-emergent should take care of the annual, so go out in a couple weeks. We're a little early still.
All right, so what is the earliest date to seed fescue in the eastern half of the state?
The earliest, well, we don't really like seeding anything in the spring, so if you can really wait, you should try to wait till fall, but you want to get those soil temperatures up to in the 50s, almost 60, to get a really good take of the fine fescue.
So no date, just a...
No, there's no. I'm not a calendar guy. I don't believe in calendars.
All right, so in the west, same question?
Same question. It's going to be soil temperature dependent.
All right, is there a selective way to get rid of grassy weeds in turf without killing the turf?
There are some selective ways to kill grassy weeds, but it's going to depend on the weed. And so you're going to have to know what you have for a lawn that you want and what grass you want to kill, and maybe there'll be a possible herbicide out there, but it depends on the weed and what your lawn is.
Okay, is it time to sod?
Yes.
All right.
Great time to sod.
Okay. You got one as a lightning round quick, right?
There you go.
There you go,
Tied
excellent.
first. March Madness.
Okay, you ready, Tom?
There's a lot of pressure here, Kim.
Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks for asking.
Can this viewer wants to know if they can buy the right kind of honeybees in a hive and just release them in their landscape?
You can buy certain solitary bees and release them.
All right. Can anything be done once you have borers that get into the trunk of a cherry tree or a peach tree?
You can do some mechanical removal of these. You can actually take little pieces of wire and dig around into these tunnels and physically harm them.
How far down do worms go when it gets really cold out? This is from a little young viewer.
Like earthworms? I would say they go several inches. They go to where the soil will not freeze.
All right. Last year, this viewer had what looked like a giant bumblebee drilling holes in their house in the soffit? What is that?
That would be a carpenter bee.
And what happens? What do they do?
They are one of the few insects that will go into cured wood, not preserved wood, but dry wood, and make a hole in it, and they nest in there.
So what does the viewer do?
Generally, insecticides puffed in, or the hole is blocked off.
Excellent. Nice job, all. So I think just based on the follow-up questions, you won.
Yes!
That was like rapid fire. It's not fair.
She read this
I was
fast.
asked more complicated questions
Yeah.
too that took more explanation.
I always get accused of stacking the deck in favor of the
Lauren
horse chair.
wasn't
Well, I
ready.
didn't do it. All right, what has oh my goodness, that is
Beautiful.
beautiful. She has
Yeah.
brought us a
Isn't that
fabulous
beautiful?
thing from her collection.
This is a moth orchid, or a phalaenopsis orchid. It's actually one of the easiest of the orchids to grow, even if you're just a beginning gardener and you don't have a great green thumb. The phalaenopsis orchid is very easy to grow. They are tropical plants. They grow in Asia. They tend to grow like up in the crotches of trees, so they don't grow in the soil. They usually grow in a bark mixture or on a moss board or something like that. They have these big, fat, thick roots that they use to hang on. They bloom once a year, usually around this time of year, obviously. They'll put out these flower stalks with all of these buds on them. Each individual flower will last for several weeks, and so this whole flower stalk will last for a month to 2 months sometimes. So they are a really long-lasting flower. They like to have bright sun, but not direct sun. So put them in a window where they're not going to have the sun shining right on their leaves, but it'll be a nice bright spot. When the flowers are done, you just cut this flower stalk back so that you just have the foliage left, and you let it grow for the rest of the year. And as long as it's nice and healthy and vigorous, it'll put out a new flower stalk in the early part of next year.
And they're just beautiful. I think she probably has to stake that one up a little bit, usually, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Just gorgeous. Thanks to Gladys, as always. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, Tom, you get the next picture. This is a viewer who wants to know whether they can do urban hives in the city, and we're getting a lot of interest in that. And this is actually, I believe, a picture that we had that was of one of our hives on campus with a fair number of bees on it.
It's one of our East Campus
Yeah.
hives. The answer depends on the city. And before you put a hive or hives out, definitely check with your municipality, which is a hard word to say. Check with your town and see what the rules are. I checked with Lincoln today, and a really good point, if you're going to do a search and you get to a city website, put in apiaries, not honeybees or bees. But there are certain restrictions that are given, such as the number of hives you can put out per square foot of your lot, and how many feet they need to be away from sidewalks or neighbors or other dwellings. So, for example, Lincoln has limits on how close you can have it to a neighbor's dwelling. You could have it right up against yours if you wanted. And then things to help the bees out are make sure definitely that there's enough food for them in the area, that there's enough foraging, flowers they can forage on, and also make sure that there's enough water for them. And in some cases, you want fences up around them at least 6 feet, so they actually have to go into a more vertical flight rather than horizontal.
Good. Very, very good recommendations. Thanks, Tom. Okay, and speaking of pollinators, Bill, this is actually our pollinator garden on campus, and a lot of people are also interested in doing this kind of thing. But this particular case, those edges that appear to be brown are actually brome.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you control brome in kind of an acreage area or an outlying area if you don't want it mixed in with everything else you've got going on?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Brome is used a lot for forage grasses, and so it's around a fair amount. But going to the back to lightning round question about trying to control a grass in a grass, it's something we don't have very good controls for. And so last year they've gone through and tilled it and rounded it several times, but there's rhizomes probably still in the soil, and the rhizomes are going to try to creep in from the outside. And so we really have to just try to keep that brome in check around those plots, mow it frequently, mow it short, keep that brome stressed out, maybe try to interseed some other grassy plants there to help outcompete the brome grass, maybe like a tall fescue, for example. It's a bunch type grass. But it's going to be really difficult to keep that brome grass from trying to go into those native areas for the pollinators.
All right, thanks, Bill. All right, Lauren, this is a Columbus viewer that has the old-fashioned quince shrubs. And it sounds like not the Japanese with a lot of fruit, but the one that blooms pretty early. And they discovered this on their quince just a week or so ago, and they wonder what is going on with it.
Well, I think that is evidence that last year you had some fruit. So those
Right.
look to be fruit mummies, which are just dried up fruits from the previous year. Sometimes fruit mummies will have diseases associated with them. With quince, there is a cedar quince rust that it could be. So you might want to just remove those just for sanitation purposes and then go on. But just last year's fruit.
All right, excellent. Sarah, this is a Norfolk viewer, and he has a Honeycrisp apple planted about 4 years ago. Main branch in the center is sort of headed north for the winter. I guess these were developed in Minnesota, so that makes sense. Last year, the tree produced three apples on one of the lower branches. He's wondering if he should prune out that bent one, or what should he do here?
Yeah, Kim, I would prune that one. I think he had also had another picture where you could really see this branch was going off in its own direction. What I would do is cut that branch back to a secondary branch where you can redirect that growth so that it will go into that secondary branch. And what you're going to end up with is then a tree that has, it's more open in the center, and you have the branches coming out to the sides more. I think I would do that because that branch is not going upright. It's not establishing a main leader anyway. So I would just prune that back to a secondary branch.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Hydrangeas are a really popular landscape shrub that, if treated right, will give you years of incredible puffy flowers. But in order for that to happen, you've got to grab those pruning shears and make the right cuts. For our second feature tonight, we focus on pruning hydrangeas. A simple way to think about how to approach pruning your hydrangeas is to understand whether they bloom early in the season, mid-season, continuously, or later in the season. And if you can keep that in mind, it'll make the task a little bit easier. Let's start with taking a look at oak leaf hydrangea, which is 100% woody. And one of the things that we want to do with this one is determine whether you want to sacrifice the flowers in a given year so that you can take out the old wood. Essentially take it all the way down to what we call the ground, which means 12 to 18 inches above ground. Choose an outward facing bud so the interior of the plant is actually thinned out a little bit. Pay attention to whether the canes that are crossing are ones that you want to remove, and whether you also need to reduce the height of the plant to keep it in balance. One of our latest blooming hydrangeas is the panicle type, and this would include ones like Unique, Limelight, Tardiva. These are ones that are 100% woody, really tough plants, and you can actually prune them into small trees. This might be one you would have seen at your grandmother's house as a small tree. Pruning on this, since it is a late season flower, that means it sets its buds in the current year's growth, so you can take that down anytime the plant is dormant. And you can see where the old pruning cuts were made last year to reduce the height, bring the flowers down into a level where they are actually beautiful and can be seen without having to get on a step ladder. And again, what you want to look at is pruning these down to a certain height. Even though the big leaf hydrangeas like Endless Summer and Glowing Embers are hardy in our climate, they're likely to go to the ground in any given year, which means that you need to prune for the flowering for the coming season. They bloom on both previous year's wood and new wood, so that means in a hard winter, all the tops will have died. We go ahead and take those off above a viable bud, and again, look for a bud pointing in the correct direction. Make sure you don't prune too low in the plant too early in the season, because with late season frosts, that could cause additional damage down in the crown of the plant. The best known of the smooth hydrangeas is Annabelle. And there are a couple of ways to prune this one. You can take them all the way down, all the way to the ground. What you'll get is thin canes with monster big flower heads. If instead you choose to prune back by about 12 inches or so, again back to live wood, what you may get is a stronger cane, a little bit of a smaller flower head, but one that won't flop over in the rain. So with the hydrangeas, again, the main thing to understand is when they flower, whether they are something that wants to go to the ground or not, choose an outward facing bud if at all possible, make a slanted cut if at all possible, prune when they're dormant if at all possible, and enjoy the beautiful fruits of your labor in the form of great big flower heads. People love those blooms, and like we just saw, there's plenty of interest actually when they dry out for the winter as well. Making a few of the right cuts now will make a world of difference in those hydrangeas in the upcoming season. And again, it's one of those things where if you prune at the wrong time, no flowers. Okay, Tom, this is a viewer sent in this picture. They found this thing on a twig in Fremont, and they want to know what it is.
Okay, well.
You brought one.
I actually happened to bring one. In this state, we have two types of praying mantids that we commonly see. One's the Carolina mantid, and the other one's the Chinese mantid. And this is actually an egg case or an ootheca of a Chinese mantid. And these are laid by the female, big old mantids out, and they just spend the winter as this egg case, and then when it warms up enough, they'll hatch out, and the little mantid nymphs will crawl out and start eating other insects. So they're actually a beneficial thing to see. You'll see these on plants often, sometimes up against foundations of buildings, maybe stones in a patio somewhere, but best idea is just leave them alone.
Excellent, thank you.
Can you tell if they're full or not, Tom?
You can by a little, if they're viable, by a little shaking test. Give it a little shake and listen.
You can hear them?
Well, it just feels a little heavier, a little denser, fuller. If it's not viable, it's very light.
They don't yell or anything?
No, there's no screaming going on. Say, stop shaking me.
Okay, and since we're talking creatures, we have a weed that has a creature-like name that we need some ID and some control on for you, Bill.
Okay.
And it would be this particular weed that is already flowering against the walls of buildings.
Yep, so that would be our henbit, or we can call it dead nettle sometimes. It's a winter annual. It's found in areas where the lawn is thin or organic, it's exposed soil. And so we see it flowering this time of year. Normally it's going to die off as the air temperature increases and it gets warmer and warmer. And so if you need to spray it, you can, but generally it's going to die off. Just appreciate it as a cool plant and then let it take its course.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Bill. All right, Lauren, this is an eastern Nebraska viewer that has moss and lichens, they think, all over their trees. They want to know what harm this will do, if anything, or is there anything they should do about it, or just enjoy it?
Not hurting a thing, just enjoy it. These are organisms that just exist on the surfaces of other plants. So particularly mosses, lichens like that on tree bark, not a concern. Just enjoy the color change.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, this is a Lexington viewer. He's not sure what these evergreens are, but he said they appear to be getting worse in the last 6 months. In other words, not evergreen, and would appreciate any advice we can give him.
Yeah, it looks like your plant is suffering from some winter damage or winter desiccation, and we are seeing a fair amount of this again this spring coming out of winter. So your plant was losing water faster than it could replace it, or when the ground is frozen and plants can't pull up moisture from the soil, then as they lose moisture from the needles, if it goes too far, then the needles or the leaves can turn brown like this. Also, if you have the plant up against a light-colored house or like your fence, which would reflect light and possibly reflect some heat, that can make it worse. So what I would do is just give this plant some time. If the buds at the tips of those branches are still alive, then the buds might be able to put out some new growth and the plant might eventually be able to recover. If the buds are dead, then you're not going to have a lot of options. But I would give it some time, at least until the end of April or even into May, and see what happens with this plant. If the spring becomes dry, then keep it well watered and just a little patience and see what's going to happen.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, we promised in our first show that we would start the Twitter challenge this year. And our very first Twitter question is tonight. So viewers, those of you who tweet, it is under a limbed up spruce tree, grass has been planted twice. Why can't they get grass to grow? And what do they need to do under the tree? Tweet your answer. Next week, we will have our audience winner and we'll see whether or not our panelist for next week answers it as well as our Twitterer. So there we go. We'll have some fun with this one. We also have a bunch of announcements. The first being the Spring Garden Conference of the West Potawatomi Master Gardeners this coming Saturday, 8:30 to 4 at the Senior Center. We have a number on the screen. That's in Council Bluffs. Our second fun thing is we will be at the Omaha Home Show on Saturday at 3 p.m. and Sunday at 2 p.m. at CenturyLink Center in Omaha with some interesting things to show our viewers and our audience. The third is the Siouxland Garden Show, which is March 27th and 29th in Sioux City at the Convention Center, and we have a URL on the screen for that one for more information. And I think we have that's it for tonight. So I guess 3 announcements in addition to our tweet. All right, so we're going to go into some questions. Tom, the first one here is a viewer who has 2 ash trees that have had a lot of damage. They're getting some estimates for removal. They're wondering if they should get, of the branches, not the tree, should they also get the trees removed just because? They're not telling us where they're from.
No, I would not cut down the tree just for the expectation of emerald ash borer. We don't have emerald ash borer yet. I would definitely do everything I could to make the tree a nice healthy tree, including trimming those limbs.
All right, thank you, Tom. Bill, this is a viewer that has a 4-year-old lawn. They're trying to figure out all the numbers on the fertilizer bag and what to use on Kentucky bluegrass. What are the 6-step, 5-step? What are those
the
numbers
steps can be a little bit confusing. The numbers too can be a little bit confusing. There's a big range in them. The more important thing is the ratio between the numbers. So how much more the first number, second number, third number, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so look at your soil tests. If you're low in phosphorus or potassium, then you want to go with a ratio that's got higher the second number for phosphorus or higher for the third number for potassium. If you don't need phosphorus or potassium, then you can use a fertilizer that's just high in that first number, the nitrogen. So, a couple times a year, the grass looks kind of yellow, go out with an application of a high nitrogen fertilizer, typically.
Okay, and I think the first thing you said was soil test.
Soil test, yeah. It's a great way to know which fertilizer should be used.
All right, thank you. Here's an Ord viewer, and I'm going to throw this one at you, Lauren, because it sounds a little odd. It's an ash, again. Sorry.
Throwing the odd ones, great.
The bark is flaking off. It's about 30 to 40 years old, and this started after a storm. They don't say if it was a hailstorm, Sarah, but the peeling is starting in the crown where the damaged limbs were pruned off, and then it goes down into the trunk.
Well, Sarah, please chime in too, but I'm thinking if they had damaged limbs pruned and then the bark's peeling off, that maybe that prune cut was a little bit long and they may have some damage running down the side of the tree from that not healing properly, and then maybe they've got some bark sloughing below a pruned area, just as one option.
Could be.
Yeah.
If it's associated with pruning, there's not a lot you can do to really heal that at this point.
Right.
So they're just going to have to wait that out and see if it's on a limb that they could remove. You could cut that back a ways possibly, but just make sure you're staying out beyond the area where the flare's at, to where you'll get that cut and it'll heal over. Okay, don't prune too tight to the trunk.
They could always send us a picture if we can see it. That would help a little bit too.
Good idea. Sarah, this is an Omaha viewer that had a silver maple removed. The stump was not ground out. They're wondering how close they can plant a new tree and how soon.
Well, if the tree didn't die from any kind of disease, if you just took it out because it was old or something like that, then really the only thing you're looking at there is just a physical barrier. How far away from the old trunk do you have to get before you can dig down into the soil to make a nice planting hole for this new tree and work around the old roots and the old trunk that's still there. So there's really no guideline as far as setback from an old tree. The old stump isn't going to really affect the new tree and its growth at all. So it's really just a physical barrier that you're looking at there.
All right, thanks, Sarah. We have about a minute, Tom. This is an Omaha viewer that has clover mites. She's been told to create a bridge into the house, like remove a strip of the soil around the perimeter. She'd like another suggestion, and chemicals are not in her wheelhouse. She doesn't really want to do that.
Ooh, I like that. Barrier is a great idea. I mean, that's probably the first step to preventing them. If you are seeing them come into the house, I would recommend just maybe doing a little water flush of the area if you can find them. And
Without flooding the basement.
Without flooding the basement. I'm not talking about like you water your soil. I'm talking about a nice spray mist that can remove them.
All right, thanks, Tom. 30 seconds.
Sure.
Bill, and a Minden viewer removed a whole bunch of cedars growing in the power lines. She wants to know if she can reseed with Kentucky bluegrass, or will the cedar acid cause harm to the grass seed?
No, grasses are pretty good at being able to grow in a diverse range of pHs, and so I don't think there's going to be any real issue for seeding into that, or sodding would be even better.
All right, good. Thanks on that. So we know that cedars are not acid. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for Backyard Farmer. We want to say thanks to our panel for another great show, and to everybody who submitted questions and pictures. Helping us on the phones tonight, we had Master Gardeners Gladys Juring, George Edgar, Kit Diamond, Kate Gall, and UNL Extension Horticulture Assistant Terry James. From Finke Gardens was Luann Finke. Next time on Backyard Farmer, we'll be focusing on what makes good soil and why that is so important in our landscapes and gardens. We'll also discuss early spring spraying for common pine diseases. So good night, good gardening, and we'll see you all next week right here on Backyard Farmer.